making Russia the enemy did not make the U.S. any safer, any richer. I think quite the reverse. Making Iran the enemy is the same thing. It would actually be to our advantage if we worked with them, if we traded with them. We actually do have a lot of common interests with both of those countries and with China. What we're retreating from is not from our own interests. We're not really sacrificing anything material. What we're retreating from is this notion, of us as the world hegemon. That's what we're abandoning. But I think it's just time to abandon it. It's just because it's no longer tenable. It was something that you could believe in and was essentially true in the 90s. But that era has passed, as Marco Rubio himself has said. And we should just let it go. There's just no reason. Just hanging on to this is, again, not to our benefit. It just increases the chance of conflict, both economic and military.
But you don't see us letting go?
Well, you see some in a very imperfect and inconsistent way, I think, with Trump. Like we said, he's not a neocon. I don't think he doesn't actually believe in the rules-based international order, but he still kind of believes as America, the exceptional nation. That's clear, right? And even with his dealings with Russia, a lot of the way that we talk about them, and just the action, this attempt to put together some sort of package, a peace plan, and then just present it to Russia, and they got to take it or leave it. Again, that's a behavior of a hegemon. It's not the behavior of one power among other powers. You're not looking at them as another sovereign power that has their own interests. If you did have that view, which we actually had during the Cold War, we did negotiate a lot of very helpful treaties. Because we did respect the Soviet Union, even though we regarded them as the enemy. We did respect them, and we were able to negotiate, these agreements that were beneficial to both sides. But he still seems to have the same attitude in a way that previous administrations have had ever since really the fall of the Soviet Union. It's just that in the end we can dictate terms, we can tell them what the way it's supposed to be, and then if it's again, we've seen maybe just like the beginnings of a change. I guess with all these change in policies, they tend to be, they don't happen overnight. I mean, there has been a change in rhetoric. They have actually gone to talk to them, and that's important. But it seems like the old habits still die hard, and at the end of the day, we're still kind of living with that old mindset. Said that, again, it's really, there's, it's almost like we're the teacher and the rest of the world are just the students in the classroom. And then we can punish different countries when they misbehave. We actually use that kind of language, and if there's two of the children are squabbling, that we can make them both stand in the corner and make them promise not to do it again. And that's all absurd. You get, again, this kind of language that in reference to the Ukraine war. And it's absurd on its face. I mean, it's just that, Russia is a great power, and Russia is actually defeating you, right, in this war. Because this is not just, you're not, a neutral third party. As we know, the U.S. has been very extensively and deeply involved in this war from the start, and, at every level. And you're losing it. And I think you just have to wake up to the fact. It seems like they really haven't.
Right. Yeah, so we need to learn how to let go of the status of the world hegemon, or we'll have an all-out war, and then in order to lose that status, right?
Yeah.
So that's just
it would be much better for us just to let go gracefully, as other great powers have, that did have world empires. The Dutch, for example.
They were graceful.
Yeah, I would say in the case, I don't know the history that well, but yeah, that's the Dutch. The Holland is a very prosperous country. It's a very, very livable country, as you well know. It's not like, that you become by letting go of this kind of status, by letting go of an empire, that you're just doomed to failure. You'll be among the loser nations. Nobody says that about the Netherlands. Right. And, Yeah, I guess the case of Britain is sort of a mixed bag. I think they've had trouble letting go, and that's part of what we're seeing right now. It's just that they know they can't do it on their own, so they've just attached themselves to the U.S. and they do whatever they can to egg the U.S. on, and the U.S. has been very, very um, much involved in all levels of operations and intelligence gathering and so on and so forth in Ukraine. So have the Brits, and they work side by side with it, in a way that's disproportionate to their real abilities. But I think it's part of that because they have trouble too at letting go. In fact, their empire is gone, but they still want to pretend that they are that imperial power, and they do it through their association with the U.S. At least they've done that until recently. Now that the U.S. is sort of looking for a divorce, now they're turning to Europe and offering their leadership. And I think, but then of course you have the French who, they still, I guess the ghost of Napoleon still haunts them, and you see that in Macron. He's offering himself as the leader of Europe.
Yeah, it's interesting. We'll see how this all plays out. But does history, just from your knowledge of history, do you feel like we will more likely be able to bow out gracefully like the Dutch? Or do we have historical examples where it ended in just a huge, horrific bang? I mean, with the case of the Brits, the empire was more like declining, but we'll pass it on to you, young America, and we will guide you, and they're still part of the empire,
right. Yeah, well, let's see. Okay, we had the Portuguese. This,
They seem to have faded out, right?
yeah,
In
right,
general. So could we be hopeful that that's what we'll see here, that we
right. I mean,
won't get embroiled in some massive conflict?
yeah. No, there wasn't a violent paroxysm, in the case of either Spain. I mean, in the end, um, they they lost their empire, and they faded into second class status within Europe. But again, they're very livable countries. I mean, very people love those countries. Yeah. Um, it's not like they had to. It fell into the abyss afterwards when they lost their empires. Yeah, in the case of these traditional empires, I really can't see it.
Should
I
we be
guess.
drawing parallels to traditional empires, or is
Yeah,
something that
maybe
the
not.
U.S.
I mean,
has
maybe the
unique?
American empire is something different. One thing it isn't, we don't have, in general, we don't have direct control over territories. What we have is these various so-called alliances and bases, all throughout the world. Um, it's, we don't, at least publicly, we don't simply issue orders to countries. Now, like WikiLeaks has revealed that we're always twisting arms, even including in Europe. And we do have a great deal of leverage with all these countries. The combination of our soft power and economic power and military power has, allowed us to really kind of dictate policies to countries around the world. And those countries that firmly resist and refuse to go along. And, the best known ones, of course, are Russia, China, and Iran. Yeah, they become enemies, and um, they've been able to survive the onslaught because each of those countries is strong enough and powerful enough to stand on their own. They were, in the case of Iran, it pretty much did stand on its own for years, but now um, now they have a lot of company. It's just like I think in the past, like Russia looked at Iran and said, well, this is best not to get involved here. We want to try to maintain good relations with the West. But when the U.S. turned its guns, on Russia, its economic guns, and quite literal, real guns, through its support of Ukraine, Russia understood, yeah, okay, yeah, well, we're in the same boat. It's time to join hands. So, yeah, I think I kind of forgot where I started with this, but that's where I ended.
That's fine. Yeah, I guess just my question is just, do you think that we will end up in a massive conflict? I think that's what's keeping so many people up at night, is that they understand, or they have this deep-seated feeling that they know that the U.S. empire is declining, and it's lashing out and twisting arms and trying to control the world. It's no longer able to.
Yeah.
And so it might it's starting to act more and more irrational, and then that's scary. And
Hmm.
and then we have this crazy country Israel that's also just dead set on getting us into a war. So to me, that's the most dangerous spot for us, is because I don't know the power of the full extent of the Israeli lobby and the Zionist control over our
Hmm.
government, if they're really able to do this. But do you think that we will be able to bow gracefully if you're just a betting man, or are we headed for some type of
Yeah.
conflict? And
Right.
if it is,
It's
where
hard
do you
to
think it
say. It's,
is?
yeah, our you almost could call it a fusion with Israel. There's been a melding of identities, not exactly a melding, but it's just sort of like, as John Mearsheimer often describes, we're joined at the hips. We kind of become Siamese twins. And so it's just not going to be easy to separate. I mean, it's not just like, okay, yeah, this isn't working out. Because again, we have so many true believers, both in the government and, among the common people, that this will be very difficult. Yeah, so it is a very dangerous situation because Israel has become increasingly kind of an apocalyptic cult, or it's a country uh, that is now governed by an apocalyptic cult. Um, and yeah, we have thrown in our lot with them. Now, like in the case of Iran, we'll have to see what happens. Again, Trump has shown some realism. I think, again, he's not the first one. Is other administrations, Biden, I think, came very close to war with Iran. George W. Bush did. Um, but But when they got close, again, I think there are enough people, again, the people that really understand the balance of military power just told them that this is a very, very bad idea, and they've pulled back. And it looks like Trump is yet another president who's done the same. But it's not over. Again, I think this will be key. If Trump is able to withstand the pressures, which are intense and probably will only become more intense over time as if he continues to pursue negotiations, then this is not that we have actually divorced Israel, but we have we'll show that we can achieve a degree of independence. Just a degree, just a step back from the abyss, and then maybe um, maybe not certainly not an actual divorce from Israel, but a slight distancing of the relationship. If we could achieve that, we'll see. I think it's all very, very unclear at this point. It's very doubtful. I mean, again, all of us were quite pleased by the ceasefire that was achieved, through the offices of Witkoff and who was working as Trump's envoy. But then they broke it. I mean, it fell apart, and it fell apart with our blessing, and just a couple of months later. So we seem to be off to a good start with Iran, but we've seen good starts end very, very badly already. There is this lack of consistency, again, and I think in the case of the Middle East in general, it's not just a lack of consistency. There is a real question about whether or not, there really is goodwill. In the end, do they really want peace? I'm not sure that they really do. Maybe if they can get it cheaply, they'll go for it, but they may not make the sacrifices, or they may not persist, which is, again, to hammer out these agreements, it takes time. It takes, persistence. It takes patience. And I don't know if those are qualities that you really would associate with Trump. And maybe that he'll get frustrated with the Iranians at some point and do a 180. Or just tear it all up.
Right. Yeah. And if any deal that maybe is met between America and Iran, I'm sure that it won't satisfy Netanyahu. Netanyahu would
Oh
only
yeah,
be
no
satisfied
question.
with, right. So what could Israel do? What could Netanyahu do other than we talked about actually trying to attack on its own, and then
Yeah,
that helped that they dragged the United States in after
right.
Israel's attack. Is there anything like what kind of powers and pressures do they have
Well,
to
again, they
change
have a
Trump's
lot
opinion?
of, I mean, again, these mega donors, but more than that, um, there are really, um, let's say, passionate Israel supporters just throughout the administration, but also, the permanent bureaucracy. So he has a lot of leverage to push, and he has, APAC, and he has the other lobbies within the U.S. He has his friends in the media. Um, you know, the he has a lot of levers that he can pull on. But
So do you think that if we do get some agreement, there's a good chance we'll renege on it, just like we did the last JCPOA?
Well, yeah, I think there is. I mean, again, it was Obama actually. He just immediately failed to do his part of it. It wasn't just the fact that Trump tore it up, but Obama failed to lift the sanctions. That was part of the deal. And the Iranians have to be aware of that. Again, they just might go in and do this and say, "Oh, these people are probably going to cheat, but we'll do this." That'll just keep them off our backs for a while, like I was saying. And
What
meanwhile,
happens
we've
if they
got
cheat? If they cheat, then what does that do? I mean, further loss of face internationally, right, for the
it
Americans. Like,
should, it should, that should
no,
be the
we can't make
result,
agreements with the Americans anymore.
right?
They always cheat on it.
Yeah, I think in the past, I mean, again, that like most of the world kind of just wasn't really looking closely. And then if the Americans condemned Iran, and again, the Europeans were supposed to be guarantors of the JCPOA, and they failed completely. They did not do their part either. And the Iranians saw all this, but it was just at that time. It was just that the U.S. had all the power, including the soft power, and the Iranians had none. So you can just kind of do what you wanted to Iran, and there didn't seem to be any consequences. But again, the world has changed. Again, Iran has friends that it didn't have before, and the U.S. soft power has declined. So it'll be more difficult. I mean, yeah, okay, if we walk away, within the U.S., within the U.S. echo chamber, and with our Western allies, probably they'll put the blame on Iran somehow, which is what they've always done in the past. But it just it's not going to. I don't think it's going to be convincing again for the rest of the world.
Yeah. I feel like if you say that we're joined at the hip with Israel, then eventually we're going to be headed to some type of all-out war. Because I just don't see Israel looking into the future. I just don't see them stopping what they're doing in Gaza and the West Bank, and it's going to incite some type of pushback from their neighbors. They'll continue into Lebanon and Syria. Zionism, I feel like, is dying, and I just feel like the U.S. will be die with it. That's kind of the scary part.
Yeah, no, I think that's certainly true. I mean, there's a real chance of that. To this again, I think it's going to end very badly for Israel, but what the bad end for Israel will likely involve us. Again, we're far away, but it will be a humiliation. And maybe
It's so frustrating. It's so crazy. There's no reason for this. I don't understand how. I don't even want to ask you the question, because I always ask you, like, how did it get to this point where the
yeah,
Israel lobby and the Zionists have so much control over my country that we can just make such irrational decisions that are not in the interest of the United States at all, that are destroying the United States, that is destroying the United States.
yeah,
It's just mind-boggling to me. And we just got to sit and watch it happen, and get called anti-Semites for it.
yeah, right. Right. I mean, yeah, it's very frustrating. Again, like we've said before, there are trends that are encouraging. There is a real shift in public opinion, especially among younger people, both conservative and liberal. Both Republican leaning and Democrat leaning, and that bodes well for the future. And it's got to be very alarming for the Israel firsters. Their reign will come to an end. So there is a chance. Again, I think, like I've said, the I think what we can really hope for is, I'm afraid it's going to come too late to say Gaza or the Palestinians, but we can hope for, with regard to the U.S. relationship to Israel, is that there will be eventually, that um, the Zionist influence will be driven from this government. It may take a whole another generation. Hopefully it won't be that long. Again, it seems like Israel's own actions is accelerating the trend. And maybe instead of being a generation, it could be 5 or 10 years or something. But we do see a real dramatic shift away from Israel and in favor of the Palestinians, that I think is just bound to have an impact on this country. And if we can change our policy, that would be the best thing of all. Maybe we're looking for a way to gracefully bow out. I think that's something we can hope for. It's not impossible, but it's going to be, the years ahead, the months ahead are a real minefield, because that old power is still very much in control, and they're just not going to let go. It's until they're forced out, through maybe a series of elections or something. That's the best that we could hope for, but it's just not going to happen right away. In the meantime, I think that as they sense that the end may be coming, that Zionism is in real danger, that they may become increasingly reckless. And I think that's what we're seeing already in Israel.